Hello and welcome. My name is Ilda and I'm a partner in the Immigration Department at Kingsley Napley. Given that from the 1st of January, British citizens travelling into Europe will be deemed as third country nationals, UK law firms who regularly send British national lawyers to provide advice to their clients in Europe will first need to check whether work permission is required in advance of their travels. This is because every country in Europe has their own immigration rules. Equally, they should check whether there is a regulatory requirement to register with the Law Society in that respect. To that end, I'm delighted to say that I have two colleagues with me today, Jessica Clay, who's a senior associate in our regulatory department, who will be just giving an overview of things to consider from a regulatory perspective. I'm also delighted to say that I have a colleague, Nina Perch-Nielsen from Blue Lake Legal, a very well-respected lawyer practicing Swiss immigration law. I appreciate that Switzerland's not part of the European Union, although we have a strong relationship with Switzerland and, of course, quite a few lawyers travelling in and out of Switzerland on a regular basis. On that basis, I now want to turn to my colleague, Jessica. Jessica, what is the regulatory position for UK solicitors wishing to fly in and fly out of Switzerland post the 1st of January 2021?
Thanks, Ilda. UK lawyers can currently benefit from the 2019 UK-Swiss Citizens' Rights Agreement, which allows lawyers from the UK to continue providing services in Switzerland and vice versa. But this can only be for a period of not more than 90 days of actual work in a calendar year. And this is on the basis of a written service contract put in place and commenced prior to the end of the transition period. With such an arrangement in place, UK lawyers can then advise on UK and international law in Switzerland on a fly-in, fly-out basis.
Thank you. Are there any conditions or restrictions attached to the scope of permitted practice?
Well, temporary practice for third country lawyers is not governed by Swiss federal law. So in practical terms, this means that different cantons could have different provisions relating to the scope of permitted practice. So taking Geneva as an example, a foreign lawyer might be authorised to appear before the courts of the canton or visit a detained client, but only if assisted by a lawyer registered in that canton. My understanding is that this will be determined on a case-by-case basis, and the third country lawyer will need a certificate issued by the competent authority of their home country, as well as a guarantee of good reputation, for example, a certificate of good standing. And they might also need to prove their knowledge of the French language. But if we compare that to Zürich, there doesn't appear to be the same arrangements in place. So the overall message is that scope of permitted practice could actually vary from one canton to another.
Thank you. Will legal protected privilege apply?
For the time being, the position remains slightly unclear, and there is no legal assurance that national legal professional privilege in Switzerland will apply to foreign lawyers. So all that can be said for the moment is that you check the rules on the ground to ensure you comply with any local requirements.
Thank you, Jessica. That was really helpful. Nina, just from Swiss immigration perspective, do you have any top tips for UK law firms that need to send their lawyers into Switzerland after the transition period ends?
Hello, Ilda. Thanks for having me. First, I would advise that they have a look at the status of the specific employee before coming over to Switzerland. Should they already hold a valid permit? So, for example, a 120-day permit they already obtained in 2020, then this permit will continue to have validity for the rest of the duration that it mentions. If they do not, then the first thought to have is, what is the scope of the service and how long is the working visit supposed to last?
Thank you. So let's just assume for a moment, because this can happen quite often, that I'm a British lawyer and I'm just going to visit my client in, say, Geneva. The idea is not to give any form of advice, more just to be and visit the client generally. Is there a time restriction on how much time I can spend in Switzerland on a British passport?
The background of the services that you're intending to perform is relevant. So you then have a distinction between either a business meeting, which is comparatively short, which means coming in, holding the meeting and leaving again, which does not require any registration or any prior work permit approval, as opposed to work, as in productive work, I've heard others call it as well, where you basically perform an activity which is part of your gainful employment and which would require either a registration for the time spent in Switzerland working as an assignee or work permit approval, depending on the duration of the intended services. Okay,
thank you. So Nina, assuming it's the former, in other words, it's just a business meeting, is there a time limit, a maximum of time that you can spend?
Not really. So also for non-European nationals that we see coming in and out who are actually on a visa, we do see some of them being issued for very short amounts of time and others for longer as well. The distinction between the business meeting and then gainful employment type of activity and work is very difficult to determine sometimes. So if you are going to come and spend 3 weeks here, then the likelihood of the authorities accepting that this is just a simple business meeting is of course lower than if you really can show you're coming in, you're having the meeting and you're leaving again. So we usually say as soon as you start opening up your laptop, being on the phone, writing emails, doing tasks like that, the closer you are to the gainful employment type of activity, which really you should look into getting organized either via online registration or work permit approval.
Okay, that's really helpful because I think that's probably going to come up quite a lot. I suppose then the question, if you, as British citizens, is there going to be a requirement that you apply for a visa in advance of travel, be it for just a visit that is a business meeting? Is that something that they have to apply for in advance of travel, or is it given at port as British citizens?
So British citizens also from 2021 onwards will not require any kind of entry visa to come into Switzerland, just like they do not yet at the moment, or do not at the moment at all, I'm sorry. If it surpasses the exemption period, so if we're saying this is not a meeting, it is actually productive work, you have an exemption for up to 8 days per calendar year per assigning entity. So this is the company assigning someone, not per person, but the company assigning someone. The reason for this being that going forward for the next 2 years, per agreement between Switzerland and the UK, the online registration system will still be in place. So you will still be able to register your employees for an assignment in Switzerland for up to 90 days per calendar year, meaning one day you could send a person or you could send 5 people. It's just per day taken off the account of the employer. This would need to be done at the very first time 8 days in advance of the first working day. Subsequent registrations over that system can be organized 1 day in advance. If it is longer than that, which would be the case if you go over the 90 days, then a different work permit status and process apply. But that would then also go into residence and longer term stay than the fly in, fly out that you're referencing now. So in short, up to 8 days per calendar year from the company's point of view, no registration is required, even if it's work. Anything above those 80 days, you will need to register online just as you do already now. So you can use the same account that you've already been using for that purpose.
Thank you, Nina. That's really helpful. Let's assume we've gone past that. We've assumed that is gainful employment and the exemptions that you've just mentioned now don't apply. How difficult would it be to try and obtain a work permit, and how long in advance would one need to apply for, just in order to make sure that the lawyers actually meet whatever deadlines they need to meet?
For stays that are in excess of the 90 days which are available, we would recommend perhaps looking into a 120-day permit, and that permit type allows for up to 120 days within the granted 12 months. These do not have to be equal to a calendar year, so it can start in the middle of the year and just keep going until the middle of the following year, and allow for many trips in and out of the country without having to let the authorities know beforehand which exact dates are going to be used. The duration time to obtain this kind of permit depends from one canton to the next, unfortunately. So in some of the faster cantons, it can take, I'd say, 1 to 3 weeks to get such an approval through from the moment of submission. In some other cantons, this can take 5 to 7 weeks, I'd say.
Thank you. That's really helpful, because I think the difficulty sometimes is when British lawyers are flying out at a moment's notice and it's going to go past the gainful employment. We know that it's work permit, they need to go out really quickly. It's going to be difficult, I can imagine, for law firms to plan for those kind of eventualities. But where they do know that work permission is required, then they should be allowing, I think is the key takeaway, for the actual process of the visa, depending on where the individual is working.
I think there's one other thing that we usually recommend clients to do as well, especially if they have several employees they're going to be assigning into Switzerland, is to use the online registration account wisely, meaning not to sort of send the first person off in January and then be shot out by February, March, but to plan the use of that system so that also later in the year, if someone just needs to come for 2 or 3 days, you're not going to have to go through the entire work permit approval process for such a short stay. Some cantons are more generous than others when it comes to, accepting, right, we haven't used the entire 90 days yet, but we would like a work permit for, this 1 month over here, just in order to keep the flexibility for those who have very short visits, where, as you say, sometimes it's very, very close to actual intended starting date. The other point to be made about the online registration system is that in cases of, big exception, let's say, you could also shorten that amount of 8 days prior to the first working day. This, however, should really just be reserved for emergencies. Very often, one of the examples will be machinery which has stopped and requires urgent maintenance. Otherwise, there would be, ill effects to humans or animals and so on. I'm not quite sure how we can transfer that to lawyers' work in connection, but there might be cases like that too. I mean, we've seen, especially this year, that urgent cases and special situations can arise from any side. So that can also be taken into account, that if you do have something where it warrants not respecting those 8 days, you can let the authorities know, and of course it will be up to them to decide whether they grant it or not.
Thank you, Nina. That's really, really helpful. Thank you. I want to say a big thank you to Nina and to Jessica for sharing their expertise today. We hope you found this really helpful, and we look forward to you joining us again when we cover up our last and final webinar series on the fly-in, fly-out lawyer. Thank you.